What's going on, everyone? I hope you're all having a fantastic day. Today we are ranking the drop spots on the revamped Kings Canyon from Season 8. There's obviously better spots for different reasons, so we are ranking the spots with the sole purpose of its overall ability for hot drops. This means they will be suited for more kills and better rotations that will also lead to more kills. This list is just for pubs, and I will also share my brief thoughts as we go through this list on each location's looting potential, but the main reason again is we are ranking these spots for kills and lots of action. We are also only ranking the named locations, and there's a lot of spots to cover, so we're going to go through it pretty quickly. So let's jump right into it, and starting at the bottom, we have one of my favorite places from when the game first came out, and that is swamps. However, I now find that not too many people land here anymore, and it's kind of disjointed from the rest of the map. The one good thing that does go for it is the fact that it is so close to labs, so rotations might not be that bad, and the loot here overall is pretty decent. However, the loot is pretty spread out, so it does take a fair amount of time to loot in its entirety. I do enjoy swamps, and it might be a good place to drop if you want a longer game. Next up, we have Broken Relay, and there's not much to say about this location. In my opinion, there's barely enough loot for 3 people, and it's kind of an awkward spot. I pretty much never land here, and there really isn't too many other people that land here as well, because the looting potential is pretty poor. One thing that does go well for this spot is that it is so close to Capacitor, which has a lot of action, so again, you can have some good rotations. Similarly to this, you can rotate to Rig, but generally Rig is going to be the wrong way from the circle, so I generally don't like that too much. I would just say to skip this spot unless you do want a slower game. Next we have, at number 19, we have one of my favorite ranked spots and overall spots for wins, and this is Water Treatment. Water Treatment I do find has a single team or 2 teams landing here quite often and is decent for early game fights. However, my biggest issue with Water Treatment is the fact that it has fairly poor rotations. It is all the way to the south side of the map, and I often find myself having to run pretty far to the north, even if I don't have a far rotation, just to get to the circle. There aren't many teams to fight till I get to the map room or repulsor in the east side, or salvage and market in the west, which is also a negative for me. Water Treatment I think is one of the better spots to land if you are a newer player, so give it a try, and it does have pretty decent loot. Moving on from Water Treatment, at number 18 we now have the Rig. The Rig nearly always has a team landing here and is a great for early game fights, but much like Water Treatment, I find rotations sometimes aren't the best. It is also shoved in the corner of the map, which means you could have an extremely far rotation if you do have to go to somewhere like Water Treatment or something like that. Likewise with the Water Treatment drop, it isn't the best for finding teams while rotating, as really the only location where you might find some teams is Capacitor. Swamps and Broken Relay are pretty much dead locations and quiet locations, and they aren't the most conducive to getting kills, so I generally won't rotate in those directions. One thing that does make the Rig interesting is the center charge tower, which can lead to some early game fun and different ways to play the game. And if you instantly do capture this tower, it generally gives you the advantage against your opponents early on. Our number 17 pick is Hydro Dam. It is also a location that is fairly quiet. There honestly isn't much loot here, and I really do try to steer clear of Hydro Dam. I find it is also extremely revealing as there isn't much cover, and if multiple teams do land here, it is a very tough fight with the limited loot that you do get from the little buildings on the sides. The only good thing about Hydro Dam in my eyes is the fact that it is close to Repulsor, the Cage, and Labs, which does mean you have a lot of options for rotations. But the early game fights here I am not a fan of, and I often find no one else will land here as well. I'd much rather land at any of those adjacent areas. 16 is one of the most unique and notable places to drop in all of Apex Legends, and that is Bunker. For this location, I am strictly talking about the actual bunker itself, so not the small town to the west or the river buildings to the east. The straight up fact is that the bunker has a very small amount of loot, but it does have all the loot very close together, which is a good thing. I don't think people land here as much as they used to in the early days of Apex Legends, but again, this is much like Hydro Dam for me. It has superb rotations, and you'll never have to run far to get into the zone since it is in the center of the map. This location might be one of the most unique areas in all of Kings Canyon, as it really does allow for an infinite amount of different rotations, but since it is in the middle of the map, it will create a lot of third parties and a lot of randomness early on, which can be tough for some to overcome. One nice thing is that you probably won't even need to move far from here, as most of the teams will just rotate to you if they do hear you fighting. Keeping with the theme of some of the older drops, next we have the Pit. The Pit is very similar to Bunker in my eyes, but is a lot more 50-50, and I find people aren't dropping here as much as they used to in the past, as a lot of people are dropping at Spotted Lake these days. Again, the Pit is a very 50-50 environment, where if a team is landing here, you are pretty much just rolling the dice and leaving your life up to luck on whether or not you're going to get a decent gun from the loot boxes. This in my eyes is a poor way to play and isn't great for kills. The loot in the pit is decent, but not as much as some of the other areas on this list. Much like bunker, the pit does have very solid rotations, especially now that there is another path out of here, and will be a good spot for some third parties at runoff, containment, or spotted lakes. Next up is artillery, and this area is a bit of the opposite from some of our previous drops. I find artillery does have decent loot and lots of options when actually landing here, which is nice, but it does lack some rotation options at the moment. Really, you're either going south to containment or north up into crash site. Crash site does feel like a far rotation, and by the time you do get there, the enemy teams are probably already healed up or third parties are already gone, so it isn't really conducive to that. Rotating south towards containment is usually where I end up going since it is closer in my eyes and is easier to get some kills there since you are coming in from height. Overall, artillery is decently balanced with a drop spot, good loot, and a team or two to fight, and some early rotation options. This is another one of the spots I would recommend going if you're looking for some early game action, even though it may lack some mid-game fights. At 13, we have a drop spot entering the arena from World's Edge, and that is Mirage Voyage. Mirage for me is honestly a spot that I haven't had a whole lot of experience with as of yet, and I've only landed here a few times, and there really hasn't been many teams landing here for some reason. The loot here is amazing, and it has a lot of it jam-packed close together, which is a great thing. If you do get a team landing here, you may get some easy early game wipes, and this can lead you to getting a lot of high kill games if you do have this happen to you. My favorite part about this drop is its close proximity to Gauntlet, Salvage, and Market, which all by themselves are usually crazily populated areas with a lot of action, so fights off of rotations won't be an issue. Again, I don't have the most time landing here yet, and I would love to hear what you think of Mirage Voyage being on Kings Canyon, so drop a comment down below. It is number 13 on my list because, again, the handful of times I have landed here, there just hasn't been that many teams landing here, which isn't what we are looking for when there are so many great places to drop so close to Mirage Voyage. Moving on to number 12, we have Runoff. Runoff for me is somewhat similar to the pit, where it has solid rotations to the pit and spotted lakes and airbase, or even bunker or some of the adjacent no-name areas. The only thing that makes Runoff much better than the pit in my eyes is the fact that it has a great amount of loot, and a lot of it. I land here quite often. I often find teams will land here as well, but sometimes landing here is a little quiet, which can be a good thing for those trying to last a bit longer in their games. Not too much to say about Runoff, honestly. Give it a try, and I think you will find it will work well for your overall game. Next up, we have Airbase, and Airbase is pretty much the same as Runoff for me. It is slightly higher because there is even more loot here, and even more places for teams to land to fight and get fights early off of spawn. Also, I find that the adjacent area Gauntlet is usually an absolute nut house early on, which makes rotating to Gauntlet great for third parties. I will say pretty much everywhere from here on out is going to be a great place to drop for kills, and it really depends on the drop ship path. All of these locations are places I pretty much drop regularly. I just want to take a moment and say, if you are enjoying this video, hit that like button and check out the Twitch streams, as I would be happy to chat about Apex Legends and all things gaming. I appreciate your support. Now kicking off the top 10, we have the Cage. What can I say about the Cage? It can probably be one of the most insane places to drop and one of the most frustrating places to rotate through. The Cage in a lot of ways is like a fortress, and it almost always has another team landing on it. If it doesn't, you won't have long till an enemy team has to rotate through this area. The Cage has a great vantage point of the large area in the valley and can be a great place to catch unsuspecting teams from Hydro, Capacitor, or Labs off guard. The Cage is in the center of the map, so rotations are going to be good, and the loot here for the most part is solid. Next up, we have my personal favorite from the season, and that is Market. Much like the name suggests, Market is jam-packed with everything you need to get a good game in. It has solid loot that is close together, lots of teams that will land here, and great rotations to Salvage, the Cage, or even Mirage Voyage. The Market in recent days does feel a bit lighter than it used to be. I think that may be because teams are landing north in the new areas or Salvage, but the Market overall is a great place to land, and I do recommend going here for some early game action. Moving on, at number 8, we have a new addition to the game, and this is Crash Site. Crash Site is a new point of interest and almost always has teams landing here because of this. It is a great spot for kills and decent rotations to Artillery and Spotted Lake, which also have teams more times than not. The loot is solid and plentiful, so this is not an issue as well. My only problem with this drop is that it is located all the way to one side of the map, meaning if the circle does go far to the south, you will have a tough time rotating, and it may lack some mid-game fights because of this. I will say though, you can link the balloons together in Crash Site and then in Spotted Lake to pretty much get all the way to the runoff, containment, or the pit fairly quickly, which does make for some easy rotations if needed. Number 7 is a drop that I honestly haven't done much in the past, but this season I have been dropping at labs quite frequently. I will say that the loot in labs is decent and the rotations to fight even more teams are quite incredible. The close proximity to capacitor and the cage makes it almost non-stop action for the majority of the game and can lead to high kill games. The only reason labs is a small negative for me is that the actual inside of labs can be an absolute madhouse with a crazy amount of teams early game to the point where it is definitely 50-50 or even worse odds of having success. My recommendation is to land on the outer buildings, and this will allow you to hold enemy teams inside and give you high ground. Next we have Repulsor, a drop that I honestly can't believe I am mentioning this high in the list, but the drops for me here lately have been absolutely wild. Sometimes when I land here, there can be 5 or more teams here, leading to huge games if you are able to get solid loot off of the drop. The rotations aren't bad, and people have been landing in the map room or the small area to the west for a while now, and it can lead to some great early to mid game fights as well. Repulsor itself is a huge area, which also means you have multiple options as to how to play it, and loot should be solid even with more than 3 teams landing here. Repulsor for me is a sleeper pick, and I recommend you try it out. Starting with the top 5, we have Containment. Containment, much like every spot in our top 10, has a lot of action, and this spot is fairly centrally located on the map, which again leads to great rotations and action pretty much all game long. The loot at Containment is fine for the amount of teams that generally land there, and Containment is always my go-to pick for pretty much a guaranteed team to fight. My only complaint with Containment is the fact that you are going to be third party pretty much all game long, which can be bad or good if you are able to handle the extra teams coming in. At number 4, we have Capacitor. Capacitor has been a solid drop ever since this location was introduced, and for me, this is a staple for some great early game fights. The loot in Capacitor is plentiful and close together, which allows for some very solid weaponry early on and a lot of teams to fight. If for some reason Capacitor is a slower drop, which pretty much never happens, but if there is no teams here, you can rotate to Artillery, Rig, Labs, which nearly always has some teams to fight as well. Much like Containment, Capacitor is also more centrally located and you will never have to run far to get some fights or to the zone. I can't really see anything wrong with this drop and I would definitely give it a try. I also love that there are multiple charge towers in this area, meaning if you are running with the likes of a Lifeline, you will get some easy care packages early on. Moving on now to our bronze winner, and that is Gauntlet. Gauntlet is one of the craziest drops in all of this version of Kings Canyon and has been really consistent ever since it came out way back in the early days of Apex. I honestly can't figure it out, but there are always multiple teams landing at Gauntlet, and there's a lot of great rotation spots nearby when you do leave Gauntlet. Mirage Voyage, Salvage, and Market are all close by through a balloon ride away and allows for rapid movement to find more fights. Similar to this on foot, you can easily go to Airbase or the zip line. Gauntlet for me is an extremely consistent spot and a great place to go if you are pushing those higher kill games. However, I will say you're going to have to handle a lot of teams landing here because there is going to be a lot of enemies. Our second place winner at number 2 is going to be the new point of interest, Spotted Lake. This one edges out Crash Site due to the fact that it does have some better rotations and more consistently has a lot of teams coming into it. The loot here is great and also allows for many different drop spots because of it. There is a balloon right in the middle, which does also allow for rapid movement to Containment, Crash Site, or Runoff, or even the Pit, which is also a great thing to keep the action flowing and the game moving. Spotted Lake may have a bit of the newness factor for me, but at the moment it seems to be fairly consistent, and it's one of my top spots to get a lot of kills and some action consistently all game long. And our number 1 drop spot is going to be Salvage. When Salvage came into the game during Season 5 of Apex Legends, it in a lot of ways was somewhat the new Skulltown, even if it wasn't quite as memorable or good for loot and the overall number of fights. The reason Salvage edges out such areas like Market, Gala, and Mirage Voyage is due to the fact that it is directly in the center of all of these areas. So not only do teams often drop here, this also allows us to pretty much travel to any of these adjacent areas with a zip line or a short walk, and it allows you to pretty much keep the aggressive playstyle moving all game long. Loot is solid at Savage, although not as good at Market, my personal favorite drop spot at the moment. But again, it is all of these things, the hot drop, the easy rotations, the looting, that gives Salvage the edge for me and makes it my go-to drop spot on Kings Canyon Season 8 for those high kill games. So that is my ranking of the Apex Legends Season 8 aggressive drop spots for higher kill games for Kings Canyon. Drop a comment down below and let me know what are your favorite drop spots this season. We do have a community Discord, which is a great way to chat with myself and our community, seek players to play with, and get questions answered that you may have. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you in the Twitch streams. Till next time, peace out.